Guilt. What a fascinating little tormentor it is. The relentless whisper in the back of the mind. The weight upon the heart that, try as we might, cannot be ignored. But of course, the question at hand is not whether you or I feel guilt. No, we are here to talk about the avoidant. Those elusive figures who slip through the cracks of intimacy like smoke through an open window. Do avoidants feel guilt? The answer, my dear listener, is yes, but not in the way you might expect. You see, guilt in its purest form is the mind's attempt at justice. It is the internal court, the unseen judge and jury that assesses our deeds and delivers its silent verdict. For most, it is a natural response to wrongdoing, a motivation to correct, to atone, to seek redemption. But for the avoidant, guilt is warped, reframed, and ultimately used in a way that does not lead to resolution, but rather to retreat. This is where things become interesting. For the avoidant, guilt is both a thing to be evaded and a thing to be preserved. A contradiction, you say? Yes, indeed. And yet contradictions are the very foundation upon which the avoidant operates. They long for love but fear it. They crave connection but sabotage it. They seek intimacy but only at a distance. And so, it is only fitting that their relationship with guilt should follow this peculiar paradox. So let us take a journey. Let us venture into the mind of the avoidant, where guilt is not merely an emotion, but a tool, a weapon even. And by the end, you may find yourself looking at your own past with new eyes. First, we must define our subject. What exactly is an avoidant? The term itself is broad, encompassing two distinct categories: the dismissive avoidant and the fearful avoidant. The dismissive avoidant. These are the solitary creatures, the self-proclaimed islands of emotional detachment. They convince themselves that they need no one, that independence is the highest virtue, and that relationships are, at best, an occasional indulgence and, at worst, an existential threat. Then there are the fearful avoidants, the wild cards, the pendulums swinging between love and fear, intimacy and isolation. They crave connection as much as they fear it, torn between the longing for closeness and the terror of losing themselves in another. Now, why does this distinction matter? Because guilt manifests differently in each. The dismissive avoidant feels guilt like a distant thunderstorm, heard but never quite close enough to get wet. They do not sit with their guilt. They do not reflect. They do not seek redemption. Instead, they repress it, push it aside, convince themselves that whatever happened was necessary for their freedom, their self-preservation. The fearful avoidant, however, wrestles with guilt like a man drowning in his own contradictions. Their guilt is erratic, overwhelming, spilling out in moments of vulnerability before vanishing in the tide of avoidance once again. They may express it, but they will not act upon it. But now we must look at the grand mechanism at play. If one were to study the emotional life cycle of an avoidant relationship, one would find something remarkable. A pattern, a cycle, a wheel that spins with eerie precision. It begins, as all stories do, with hope. The avoidant desires love. Yes, truly, they dream of a connection that does not suffocate, of a partner who understands their need for space yet stays close enough to be felt. And so they find someone warm, someone safe, and for a time they believe they have won. But then, it happens. The shift, the unease. They begin to notice things that were always there but now seem intolerable. A text left unanswered, a need expressed, a request for more time, more attention, more closeness. And so they pull away. They rationalize, this person is too much, this relationship is suffocating me. They convince themselves that they must leave. And they do. And at first they feel relief. Sweet, unburdened relief. They have reclaimed their independence, their solitude. They are free once more. But freedom, for the avoidant, comes at a cost. Because soon, the loneliness creeps in. The echoes of what was, of warmth, of presence, of something real, begin to haunt them. And this, my dear listener, is where guilt begins to whisper. Not a loud, screaming guilt, not the kind that demands action. No, this is a quiet guilt, a question, an ache. Why does this always happen to me? Why can't I ever find the right person? But notice, if you will, the wording. The guilt is not framed as I made a mistake. No, that would require self-reflection, responsibility. Instead, it is rebranded, rewritten. The universe is against me. Love is impossible. I am the victim here. And so the cycle begins again. Now here is where things become rather devious. A secure person, when confronted with guilt, does something quite remarkable. They face it. They acknowledge their role. They seek to make amends. They use it as a catalyst for growth. The avoidant, however, does something altogether different. They run. But how does one escape guilt, you ask? There are many ways. Some drown it in distraction. They throw themselves into work, into hobbies, into a carousel of shallow relationships designed to keep them from ever having to look inward. Some rewrite the story. They convince themselves that they were the ones who were wronged, that their former partner was too needy, too demanding, too much. And some, rather curiously, cling to their guilt like a lifeline. Yes, you heard me right. Some avoidants, rather than escaping guilt, keep it close, not because they wish to change, but because it serves a purpose. You see, guilt for them is not a motivator for redemption. It is a barrier, a reason to never try again, a reason to stay safe, to stay distant, to never risk true intimacy. I hurt someone before. I cannot be trusted. Better to stay alone than to risk repeating the past. And so, guilt, the very thing that should inspire connection, instead becomes the thing that keeps them isolated. Now, we arrive at the final act. The avoidant, now alone, sits with their guilt. Not enough to act upon it, no, but just enough to romanticize what was lost. And so they do something quite remarkable. They hold on to the idea of the relationship, but not the reality of it. They daydream, they reminisce, they wonder what if. But should their former partner return? Should they attempt to bridge the gap? The avoidant recoils once more, because the fantasy of love is safe. The reality of it is terrifying. And so they remain in limbo, never fully letting go, but never stepping forward. Now here is where the hopeful among you lean forward. You wish to know, can they change? Can they break free? The answer, my dear listener, is a frustrating one. Yes, but only if they choose to. You see, an avoidant can spend a lifetime running, rationalizing, and retreating. But the only way to break free from this cycle is to do the one thing they fear most: sit with their guilt, to face it, to process it, to let it transform them. But that is no small task, and it is not one that you, nor I, can force upon them. It is a journey they must take willingly. And so the question is not, can an avoidant change? The question is, will they? And the answer, my dear friend, is entirely up to them.
If you believe this video might help someone dear to you, share it with them. A small gesture on your part could mean the world to a friend in need.